Hello and welcome to the finals of the March Madness Tournament Series. Today, in a best out of 5, Izzet Burn will be facing Junt Midrange. We will be playing out the Izzet side, while Yurtle will be on Junt. In game 1 we keep our opening hand with Gutter Snipe in it, opponent leads with a tri-land, we play a Mountain. Opponent has a second land into Elvish Visionary to draw a card, and we will play a land and pause the turn with Think Twice up. Opponent attacks for 1, puts us down to 19, and we play Think Twice, drawing into a land and here a Kiln Fiend, but we decide to lead with Gutter Snipe, so we can perhaps pay the removal spell and keep our Kiln Fiend alive, which is more important. Our opponent has a Cultivate to ramp, does not attack into the Gutter Snipe, and here we have a 4th land as well as Tolerant, but decide to go for the Kiln Fiend so we can play the Tolerant and maybe activate him right away. And we also have a Vapor Snag up as protection here. Opponent plays another Visionary and passes, and here we have a lot of decisions. We could make our Kiln Fiend unblockable with Artful Dodge, we could perhaps bounce one of the Visionaries, we could flashback a Think Twice, play Tolerant, a lot of options, but we decide to go for Krenko's Command to have a little more board presence, but still not get blown out by Anger of the Gods, since we still have a Tolerant in hand. So we attack with an unblockable Kiln Fiend, 7 power, and decide to keep back the Gutter Snipe. Our opponent does have the removal for the Kiln Fiend. Our opponent's gonna play a Pelakka Worm to gain 7 life to go back up to 21, as we draw another Gutter Snipe and play out the Tolerant with Vapor Snag up. And we could also use the Artful Dodge in the graveyard, but we decide to just pause the turn with the Vapor Snag available. Opponent goes for an attack, we take it, go down to 12, and that's a second Pelakka Worm, which we do let resolve and then Vapor Snag back. So the opponent eventually at 25 life with a Pelakka Worm in hand and 1 on the battlefield, as we are going to deploy our second Gutter Snipe, which will resolve here, and we decide to attack with everyone. So we are offering the trade with Tolerant for the 2 Visionaries, or perhaps Gutter Snipe. Our opponent does decide to double block the Tolerant. We don't have a way to punish him, so we just draw a card to get another Drake token and some more Gutter Snipe activations. Opponent attacks us, go down to 5, does not have a removal spell to burn us out, but does play the second Pelakka Worm to go back up to 22, but we top deck a 3rd Gutter Snipe. So now we have 6 damage whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. We cast a Vapor Snag, returning the Pelakka Worm, opponent at 15. We have an Artful Dodge, opponent is now at 9 life, and a Banefire for 0 will be enough to get enough triggers so we can attack for the win. So Izzet Burn takes game 1 over Junt Midrange as we move into the second game of the finals. In game 2 we mulligan a no-lander and keep a 5-land hand with 2 young Pyromancers in it, so we will need to draw into some instants or sorceries to make this hand good. Opponent leads with a tri-land, we decide to play out our first young Pyromancer and pass the turn. Opponent's gonna use a shock right away to take out the young Pyromancer before it starts generating any tokens, and we will play out a Guildgate and a Kiln Fiend so we can hopefully deal a lot of damage on the following turn if we draw some sort of instant or sorcery. Opponent has a Darkseal Ingot and passes, and here we draw a Skullcrack so we can play young Pyromancer main phase and attack with the Kiln Fiend to use Skullcrack right away now that our opponent's basically tapped out, and deal 7 damage, generating an additional elemental token thanks to the young Pyromancer. Opponent's gonna use this turn to cast a Cultivate as well as a Ground Assault, taking out the Kiln Fiend, which is the most dangerous and explosive creature. We draw into a Vapor Snag, attack for 3 with the young Pyromancer and the token. Opponent is at 10, and our opponent's gonna cast a Runescar Demon, which will allow him to search up any card in his library. And end of turn we're gonna use a Vapor Snag on the Runescar Demon, generating an additional elemental token. We attack for 4, putting the opponent down to 5, and we have a very difficult decision to make here. We could play around a possible Anger of the Gods so their opponent could have searched up with the Runescar Demon, so we decided not to play out the Tolerant, but our opponent searched up an Inferno Titan, which can take out our entire board. And on our turn we can't really play out the Talrand because it would die right away to the Inferno Titan, so we pause a turn, our opponent attacks, using the triggers of the Inferno Titan to deal 3 damage to our face, and we'll pump the Inferno Titan once with its fire-breathing ability, dealing an additional 7, putting us down to 10 life, and Pelaka Worm will put the opponent out of burn range and back up to 12 life. We can play Talrand as well as Krenko's Command, generating 2 goblins and a Drake token, and now on our opponent's turn he's gonna attack. The Inferno Titan triggers will be taking out our Talrand and one of our goblin tokens, and we can block, still survive at 3 life, and another Runescar Demon for the opponent will likely look for some burn spells, and we draw a Mountain, which will not be good enough here, as our opponent can simply Banefire us out for 8, and that will do it. So it's now 1 apiece, and Junt Midrange equals it up with Izzet Burn. In the third game we decide to keep a very good opening hand, which has both a Talrand and a Young Pyromancer, as well as some instants and sorceries to trigger them. Our opponent is going to play a second Triland and passes a turn. We draw into a Kiln Fiend, which we decide to play out right away instead of the Krenko's Command or Young Pyromancer, as next turn we can play the Young Pyromancer perhaps with Vapor Snag to get value out of it right away, which would not work with Kiln Fiend. Instead our opponent decides to cultivate to ramp this turn, and this turn we decide to play out an island, which probably should have been the Izzet Guildgate instead, and decide to play out the Krenko's Command, triggering the Kiln Fiend so we can attack for 4. And we still have Vapor Snag up in case we want to save the Kiln Fiend from removal. Opponent is down to 16 life, plays out a Guildgate, and on our turn we can play yet another Krenko's Command, which might force the opponent to use an Anger of the Gods, and will also trigger the Kiln Fiend. And if our opponent does have an Anger of the Gods, we still have the Young Pyromancer and the Talrand to redevelop our board. Our opponent does have a removal spell for the Kiln Fiend, but still takes 2 from the Goblins, and passes a turn here. And here we think our opponent does not have an Anger of the Gods, or he probably would have used it on our 4 Goblin tokens. We attack for 4, putting the opponent down to 10, and play out the Young Pyromancer. And here our opponent does have the Anger of the Gods, which we did not expect, and plays a Guildgate, passes. End of turn we go for a Think Twice, which draws into a Skullcrack, which might prevent life gain from Pelaka Worm. And we play out Talrand with a Shock and Vapor Snag up. Our opponent will play a Runescar Demon, which can search up any card in the opponent's library, and a Shock will try to take out Talrand, but not before we Vapor Snag the Runescar Demon end of turn, making a 2/2 flying Drake token. So at this point we have 5 damage in burn spells in our hand, and 2 damage on the board, so Think Twice just needs to find 2 more damage somewhere, instead finds us a land. We attack for 2, putting the opponent down to 7. And we have Skullcrack in case our opponent plays Pelaka Worm. Instead it's an Inferno Titan, which will take out the Drake token and deal 1 to our face, plus a Cultivate to ramp even more. We keep Skullcrack in hand in case our opponent has a Pelaka Worm next turn. Another Think Twice gives us another shot at a burn spell, instead finds yet more lands. So we have to pause a turn here with Think Twice and Skullcrack up. Our opponent is gonna attack. Inferno Titan deals 3 damage to our face right away, and the Fire Breathing would threaten to deal 9 damage, which in combination with something like Banefire could kill us, so we decide to use the Think Twice right now to maybe look for a bounce spell. Instead it does not find anything relevant, and the Inferno Titan will deal 9 damage, putting us down to 7. Opponent does not have a burn spell, but does have a Runescar Demon, which could find a burn spell next turn, and a tapped land as well for the opponent. End of turn we use Skullcrack in case we need the mana, but we don't find another source of damage, so we have to pause the turn with Shock. Opponent has a Banefire to take us out, and the Shock will not be enough, so Junt takes the third game here and is up 2 games to 1 over Izzet Burn. In game 4 we keep our opening hand, which is pretty good, having both Young Pyromancer and some instants and sorceries to go along with it. Opponent plays a second tapped land and passes, and here we decide to run out Krenko's Command over the Pyromancer, because if we play the Pyromancer next turn, we at least get a token out of the deal. Opponent's gonna play the Elvish Visionary and plays another tapped land. We attack first. Our opponent takes the trade with one of the tokens and drops to 19 life. and we decide to play out the Pyromancer, who wanted to leave up the blue mana, instead left up red, so now we're forced to shock in response to this Resounding Thunder to at least get an elemental token, and their opponent's gonna pause the turn. We try to quicken here to look for some more action, instead find a Guild Gate, attack for 2, put the opponent down to 15 and pause the turn with double Vapor Snag for next turn. Opponent has an Arbor Colossus, which is the prime target for Vapor Snag, but first we decide to use a Think Twice, don't find anything relevant, use Vapor Snag to get rid of the blocker and deal 1 damage, attack for 2, opponent's now at 12, and we pause the turn. Opponent replays Arbor Colossus, we decide to keep the Vapor Snag in hand for now in case we draw a beneficial creature, but we're just going to end up using the Vapor Snag yet again on this Arbor Colossus eventually, because we do want to be able to attack with her tokens. So the opponent takes 1 more, down to 11, and we are going to play the Krenko's Command here to increase our clock. Attack for 2, opponent's now at 9, and we pause the turn, hope that our opponent does not have an Anger. Instead he has a Pelakka Worm. We can use a Think Twice in response, but the opponent's still gonna go back up to 16 life, and we do draw a Kiln Fiend now, which could do some damage. We attack for 4, put the opponent down to 13 after losing a token, and play out the Kiln Fiend, and pause the turn. The opponent plays a Swamp, plays a Visionary, which draws a card, and plays the Arbor Colossus that we knew about. Attacks with the Pelakka Worm, we go down to 13 life, and draw a second Kiln Fiend, which could be pretty good in combination with this Artful Dodge in hand, but that means that we have to wait until next turn so we can use Artful Dodge twice on both Kiln Fiends, so we have to hope that our opponent does not have a burn spell to finish us off. So we are just going to block with 1 token, so that a Resounding Thunder with Kicker does not take us out, and a Banefire will still be lethal however, but our opponent does not have it, has a Garruk's Pack Leader instead, so now we can go for the Artful Dodge and hope our opponent does not have removal for our Kiln Fiends, because a flashback Artful Dodge means 2 triggers for each Kiln Fiend and both unblockable, so we can attack for exactly 14 damage, which is enough to take the game. So it's now 2-2 and everything will be decided in this 5th and final game. The winner will claim the title and become our March Madness champion, while the loser, well, let's just not talk about that. In game 5 we have to mulligan a creatureless hand and keep a second hand with just a Talrand in it, so we will need to draw in some additional lands this game in order to get some Drake tokens going. And here's a Think Twice, which is an exceptional draw, since that will ensure we hit our land drops. We cast a Think Twice but draw a 3rd Shock, opponent has a Visionary to draw a card, and here we draw another Think Twice but don't hit a land drop. So we pause the turn, opponent will attack us for 1 down to 19, we flashback Think Twice but don't hit a land drop, instead it's a 2nd Talrand, and our draw step does not give us a land either, so we have to main phase this Think Twice and luckily hit an island so we can pause the turn and don't have to discard. An attack puts us down to 18 and our opponent passes a turn. Here we decide to run out Talrand since we do have a 2nd one in hand, so we can pause the turn, our opponent untaps and casts a Ground Assault, taking out Talrand, and a Cultivate will ramp the opponent even further, and an attack puts us down to 17. On our turn we don't hit our land drop, which we really need to hit, so we decide to cast a Quicken to draw another card, and there we go, that's an island we can play so we don't have to discard due to hand size, and keep up Skullcrack in case our opponent will play a Pelakka Worm here. Instead it's a Graveborn Muse, which will give our opponent some card advantage in the long run, so we decide to flashback Think Twice, drawing into a Gutter Snipe, and our draw step gives us a Kiln Fiend, so we still don't find any land drops for the turn, and a lot of threats to choose from, and we decide to run out Kiln Fiend so we can keep up Skullcrack and instants like Vapor Snag, and we do decide to Vapor Snag the Graveborn Muse so we don't give the opponent too much card advantage. Our opponent will replay the Graveborn Muse and use a Shock to take out the Kiln Fiend, which we will let resolve. Our opponent attacks us for 1, go down to 15, and on our turn we do hit our land drop luckily, so we can finally play out our Talrand with double Shock up, so we can at least get some Drake tokens going. Graveborn Muse gives the opponent 1 card, Ground Assault wants to take out Talrand, but we can use Double Shock in response. We could point both shocks at the Graveborn Muse to take it out, but instead we decide to point them at the opponent's face, making the 2 Drake tokens. Our opponent is going to attack with the Graveborn Muse, and we decide to double block, smelling an Anger of the Gods, so we trade one of the tokens for the Muse. Opponent plays a Garruk's Pack Leader and a Banefire for 1. We'll finish off the second Drake token, and now we can play out the Gutter Snipe, and we have a Skullcrack and a Shock in hand, which will both benefit from the Gutter Snipe's trigger. Opponent plays an Elvish Visionary, draws a card, attacks for 4, we take it down to 11, we go. Our opponent's gonna try and play a Pelakka Worm, but in response we can Skullcrack, preventing the live game from Pelakka Worm and dealing 2 additional damage from Gutter Snipe. We can Shock end of turn, dealing 4 thanks to Gutter Snipe, and on our turn we can use Skullcrack to finish off the opponent for 5 points thanks to Gutter Snipe. So Izzet Burn wins the game and the match, 3 games to 2 over Junt Midrange. Congratulations to Izzet Burn for being our March Madness champion. I wanna thank you for watching this series and for making March Madness such a success, and also a special thanks to Yertle for helping me play out all these matches in his spare time and for being a great opponent. That's going to do it for this March Madness tournament. I really hope you enjoyed it, and as always, have a nice day.